Hello and welcome to Chapter Chat with Sarah. Here we share true life stories. Today's story is a special chapter in my book, Healing Your Life, One Leaf at a Time. Our guest is Carol, and she's going to take us on a journey back in time to the early 1900s with a story about her mother and a very special orphanage. Hello and welcome, Carol.
Glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Carol, in the fall of 2024, you gave a presentation at the Tiffin, Ohio Library and talked about your story. And your story is in Chapter 6 of my book, Healing Your Life, One Leaf at a Time. The director of the library said it was one of the best attended programs they ever had. So for the listeners, what does your story have to do with Tiffin, Ohio, and how does your story begin?
Well, thank you, first of all. In order to know my story, you have to have some background history, and it all has to do with the Union. There were large numbers of immigrants coming into the United States in the 1800s, and because of this, the Junior Order of United American Mechanics, later shortened to the Junior Order, was begun in 1845. The government had been bringing in immigrants and giving them money and other benefits based on their nationality and not on any merit. So the main workers, which were mostly miners, were afraid immigrants were going to take over their jobs. So they formed a secret union with 6 objectives. Number 1, they would help each other find jobs. Number 2, they would patronize only their businesses and no foreign ones. Number 3, they would help unfortunate or disabled people find jobs. Number 4, they would start their own cemetery for members. Number 5, they would start a funeral fund. And number 6, the most important to me, they would start a fund to help widows and orphans. So in reality, it was like an insurance policy. The members would have some peace of mind that they and their families would be taken care of if something happened. And this is where my story begins. My grandmother Mary and the lives of her 5 children drastically changed when her husband, my grandfather, John Morgan Johnson, died at the age of 31 from swine flu and pneumonia. My mom, Juanita, was one of those 5 kids. She was born on February 9th, 1914, even though she never had a birth certificate. They were a family of 3 girls and 2 boys, all under the age of 9 when he died. They had lived in Newmarket, Tennessee, and then they moved to Mascot, Tennessee, where my grandfather took a job working in a zinc mine called the Holston Zinc Mine. He was a hoister. A hoister hoisted workers and equipment in and out of the mine. His health was not good due to the hard-working conditions, but then in 1919 he came down with swine flu and pneumonia. His death left my grandmother, a widow of 9 years, and mother with 5 children and no income means for her to support their family. My grandmother's family was in Cincinnati. They were not able to take in 6 people. At that time my grandfather died, my mom was 4 years old. There was no Social Security, no WIC programs, no welfare, nothing to help my grandmother. Social Security was not put into place until several years later, I believe in 1935. Fortunately, 6 months before John died, he had joined the mechanics union. That decision proved to be a major blessing because of the orphanage benefit. For an initiation fee of $5, these 5 children could be sent to the National Orphans Home in Tiffin. Here they would be housed, clothed, fed, schooled, and taught a trade until they were age 18.
You're saying that for $5 initiation, that was what he had paid at that time? And
that was his fee for that year, and that made him a member.
Unbelievable.
Yes. So the home then, as I said, they would be housed, clothed, fed, schooled, taught a trade. That's the important one. They were taught a trade until they were 18. The home gave my mom a home and a future. And in retrospect, gave me one too. My grandmother, though, would have to relinquish all legal rights to her children. So she had to give them away. And then they had to also make their way by train to Tiffin. And so she did. My mother, just 4 years old, and on a train headed to the orphanage. The 5 children, aged 6 months, 2, 4, 6, and 8, and my grandmother, all were on this train. I cannot imagine how she did that. But in April 1919, they arrived in Tiffin, where my grandmother, Molly, surrendered 4 of her 5 children. My mom and her siblings were now called home kids because it was the Junior Order Home. The baby was too young for the home, though. The nursery was crowded and the new one wasn't built yet. And that was a big problem for my grandmother because she could not get a job with a baby at home. She had no one to watch over the baby.
Wow.
So Molly and the baby then went to Cincinnati to live with her mom until the baby was old enough to be taken in by the home. At one point, and we still have the letter, Molly was so upset, she sent a letter to the junior order home begging them to please take her baby because she could not get a job and take care of herself or the baby. It turned out that the home was a wonderful place for them. They had indoor bathrooms. In 1919, 1,000 kids that lived at the home had indoor plumbing. They had a swimming pool. They had sports. They had a band and a wonderful school system. It was a wonderful ending to the horrible beginning.
What a blessing that must have been for your grandmother. I mean, she, was not able to support the kids, so she didn't have a choice, but she had an alternative. And turns out, it sounds like, to be a wonderful alternative.
It was. I don't think you'll find a home kid today that would have any negative words about the junior order home. Everyone is quite proud of the home, what they've all become. And in fact, if you go to Tiffin today, many of the prominent people in Tiffin were home kids or home kids' kids.
I was going to say, I think that's important that you're mentioning that because at the event at the Tiffin Library, people spoke so highly of the home and what it meant to the whole Tiffin community and the success of most of the kids that went there and how they turned out. So I was blown away by not only how many people were there and the stories, but that the success of the entire program and the success of the children that attended.
It was so much fun. I was very nervous. Obviously, it was the first I had ever done, but there were home kids, or at least relatives of home kids, and they had their own stories. And they were, like I was, very happy to share them. And we sat around for probably the last 40 minutes just talking about various things that our parents or our grandparents had told us about the home. And it was just fun.
Wow. In your opinion, what could others gain from reading about your mother's story and life and growing up in the National Orphans Home? It's like, what did the experience of you sharing the story mean to you personally? And then how do you think it might possibly impact some of the institutions that we have today? Like, there seems like there's a lot to be learned about this way of life.
Well, telling my story that day was almost a cathartic experience for me. I'm an only kid, and Mom and I were very close. She's been gone for 42 years now, and just talking about her and the stories that she told me about the home, and having other people there also telling me about the home, and having such a good feeling that it seemed to bring me even closer to my mom. I really thought at that time that she was in that room. It was just a wonderful feeling and a wonderful night. You ask me who should know this story? I think everyone. Not so much about my mom. She was a very good role model for the home. However, the whole book, the whole chapter, is a story about success. How orphan kids are treated well and they're educated. They turn out to be outstanding citizens. They had a director named Dad Kernan, and because of his leadership, the orphanage was a godsend. Siblings were not split up. They were all educated. They all went to church. They all were taught a work ethic. And yet the junior order home felt like it was their home. It was just an institution that was meant to be ran well and did an outstanding job. Talking about what we could do today, well, first of all, I think our foster care system today could take some real hard looks at the setup of the orphanage. Just because they were orphans doesn't mean that they were treated badly or lacked anything. If I read right, data shows that the average foster care child who's in foster care now will be moved 5 times before they're 18. 5 times. 5 new schools, 5 sets of guardians, and yet when they get out of school, they have no training for a job. At the age of 18, they are done in the foster system. So then what do?
Good point.
I think much could be learned from the junior order home just because of the setup. And if done right, I think orphanages could be a godsend. You need the right people, but also with the right rules and regulations and caring people. My mother and other home kids, I think, proved that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that in the presentation, you shared about the success of a few people that had gone on to have really amazing careers.
We have one in our own family. It would be my mom's great niece. She works for Nike and is the global manager of HR. Not bad for it coming from an orphaned kid. I have my teaching degree and a master's, and I taught for 36 years. I don't know if I would have that sort of background if I had stayed in Mascot, Tennessee. Many of my cousins are nurses. We have a lawyer in the family. Our backgrounds, our parents dictated that. Education was important. Why? Because it was important at the home. Work ethic. A couple of my uncles, one in particular, stayed on at the home and was in charge of all of the livestock there in that big barn. And he did that for years and years. And it was an award-winning barn along with award-winning bulls. They used to service bulls for other people, and the home was quite well known for that. My mom was in the printing department, and they printed as kids. This is what they did for that half day of trade practice. They produced a newspaper that had a circulation of 136,000. Not many kids have that opportunity. The trades there were just so many. Furniture building, woodworking, kitchen, canning, printing. I believe there were 26 that you could choose from, and all of them pretty much entitled you a job when you got out. You were that smart and that knowledgeable that you could just walk into a place and get a job and be good at it.
Could you share your experience as a teacher and what it was like in a classroom when you were teaching, and then what it was like with the students that went to the lunchroom at the orphanage? You shared that at the event in Tiffin, and I thought that many people nodded their head and agreed and thought that that was very important that you shared that.
This is one of my favorite stories. There are pictures of the home, and they had a huge dining room. It seated 800 kids at a time. 800. And the picture shows them at various tables. You were seated at a table by family. So even though you didn't see each other all day long because you were in different grades or whatever, at supper time, you were at the family table. Usually the oldest, I believe it was daughter, was in charge of pretty much getting food for the rest of them, and there they sat. And these 800 kids in this picture were just, I can't really truly tell you how mannered and how well dressed and how respectful they were. And they're all sitting there smiling at the camera. And I compared that to my life as a fifth grade teacher. And the worst day of any week was when I had cafeteria duty. I would have 70 kids in the cafeteria at one time trying to keep order. There were times, and I was kind of a rough teacher, but there were times when peas and macaroni and whatever were sailing through the air, or the spills and the messes and the hands in the air wanting to go somewhere, or it was just chaotic. And so when I look at this picture, I just think of a time that was way back, and yet it was so good in that they had control, they had discipline, they had respect. I can't quite say that about my fifth graders for the last 36 years.
That's significant. Not that we're saying that the kids today are different. It was just that that environment, they were really enforcing, respect and dignity and rules. Your chapter and story was so different from a lot of the other chapters in the book because many of the chapters were about child abuse or domestic abuse or death. Uh, but many people came back and commented that they thought this was such an important chapter because it told us about broken systems and the importance of shedding light on those broken systems, which could help bring hope and healing for people. So it was a refreshing story, but also a story that kind of really laid out for us that things could be better, things could be different. And this was a time and place where they got it right.
It truly was. And it's sad in a way because In the end, when it closed in 1945, it only closed because of the Social Security Act. And yes, the Social Security Act was a very good thing. It allowed government money to be sent to parents who needed it, who could keep their families together. But on the other hand, there was still abuse. There was still problems with people not using their Social Security well. And the home was still thriving. It still had 800 to 900 kids there. And once Social Security came about, the home started to dwindle. And not to be mean, but to be honest, I'm not sure some of those kids went home to a better life. In fact, I'm almost certain they didn't. I think that, yes, orphanages have their place, but I don't think foster care is necessarily the get-go either. There are so many problems with foster care these days, and they don't have a permanent place to stay, and they don't have consistent rules and respect. One of the first things that caught my eye about the home was some of the worst things home boys ever did. And this is the bad one. They stole apples from a neighbor's tree. Now, I know that this is 2025, but nevertheless, these kids were under control. They had discipline. They knew there would be consequences. And I'm just saying that I think that truly everything was self-contained at the home. They made all their own food. They raised all their own animals. They raised all their own crops. In fact, the canning part of the home where the kids canned, they canned 45,000 quarts of vegetables one year. They knew how to do stuff. They knew how to live. So at the age of 18, nothing was new to them. They knew how to cook. They knew how to do things that would enable their life to be better. We don't do that anymore. We don't do that at all. Even in our own high schools now, we don't have home ec classes. Kids will leave the 12th grade and not know how to sew on a button or how to make spaghetti or any of those things that are basic life skills. The home provided all of that. Surely there's something that can forge between the home and foster care that can make it better for everyone. There's just got to be some person like Dad Kernan, who is the head of the home, or someone, or some union, or some school, or special government department that could take care of these kids that are without homes or in bad situations. We just can't leave them go.
And that's such an important message. And I really appreciate you sharing this because, this is our youth, this is our future, and getting them started out on a good foundation and helping them to navigate a course is important for, years to come. So I can't thank you enough for bringing this story to me and the time that we spent together and the presentation. And Carol, I look forward to another opportunity for us to visit Tiffin Library and perhaps do some other events.
It would be my pleasure. I enjoyed doing this.
Thank you for being here today. And it's a special time in memory and history. And for the listeners, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
So that's all for today. Please tune in for our next show and our special guest, Cassandra, who shares about listening intently to the messages from the angels watching over her. Until then, remember this verse. Make sure that nobody pays back wrong for wrong, but always strive to do what is good for each other and for everyone else. 1 Thessalonians 5:1-5.
You've got to run.